Hello everyone, I am Anuj Kushwaha. Welcome to my second video. I'll be analyzing some select movies of 1970s and 80s and would try to view the shift in the perspective towards Dalits in these movies. In the last video, I had explained that how the films during 1930s and 40s, even in 50s, despite claiming the reformist zeal, couldn't find a way to represent the Dalits issues adequately as they viewed movies through Swadeshi, nationalist, or Gandhian lens. Even in post-independent India, the untouchables could not find solace, respect, and dignity as promised to them during colonial regime by the national elites. Sujata in 1950s successfully portrays the dilemma of the upper caste couple, but at the same time could not provide much space to Sujata, played by Newton, procuring individualistic traits within her. She remains marginalized despite romanticized ending as the ghost of 1930s and 40s haunts the movie. That is to say, the caste system stays as rock solid as ever. Neither Sujata's foster mother nor her father feel guilty about caste system. Rather, the old couple's status is elevated as saviors or guardians of untouchables as cinematic depiction of Gandhi's vision. This video will take departure from that reformist zeal and move towards serious cinema, also known as parallel cinema, and try to locate the issue of caste and identity with the help of select movies. After independence, the Indian government aimed to institutionalize cinema. A lot of efforts were put in constructing an image of integrated India progressing through modern times. The 1960s were also difficult times, dealing with poverty, illiteracy among lower rung, medical facilities, Naxalites, etc. However, all these also served for a few directors as raw materials to contemplate and materialize them into movies. Eventually, in 1960, the government started the Film Finance Corporation to give low interest loans to which were later to be called as art movies. Such developments became the basis of parallel cinema. While Bengal spearheaded the tradition of Indian alternative cinema, this cinema has many names, including New Cinema, Indian New Wave, Parallel Cinema, and Realist Cinema. Sangeeta Datta defines the multidimensional aspect of such kind of cinema, and I quote, a defining relationship is that of the movement's position in relation to the commercial cinema industry, whereas the term new and alternative serve to underline divergences from popular cinema, the parallel cinema instead suggests a genre of cinema which runs alongside the mainstream. It has been argued that the sensibility and ideology of the educated and trained filmmaker drove this parallel cinema, reaching out to a liberal middle class viewer who shares his or her progressive notions. To the commercial filmmaker, such notions of cinema are elitist. Unquote. So, the focus was primarily on depicting the alternate view, the view from below, the pupil's view, to share their, pain, agonies, and concerns, to enter their spare, and to look closely at the nitty-gritties of the, subaltern spare, and to acknowledge their issues and concerns. These include class inequality, women's subjugation, caste discrimination, forceful migration owing to unemployment, and etc., which focus on the flip side of an otherwise contrived, serene, and romanticized world of commercial cinema. The state sponsorship helped the filmmakers to depict the realism on screen and deconstructing the contradictions of changing society. Satyajit Ray, Shyam Benegal, Govind Nihalani, Mani Kaul, Ketan Mehta, Saida Mirza, are some of the prominent figures of this period. It would be interesting to look into caste dynamics in parallel cinema. The movies in 1970s and 80s struggled to provide space and quality screen time. One can best expect depiction and realism, but not radicalism. The narratives stay within the ambit of caste system and do not create any kind of rupture, nor do the filmmakers aim to do so. In an interview to Indian Express, Govind Nihalani explains his stand. I quote, "We never thought that we are sending out a message. We were not teachers. The whole thing was that if we are honest and true to what we see around and don't try to create a drama, but to capture the essence and spirit of the situation, it will make a difference because people, there are people who will get it. The human situation inside the story was my main preoccupation." Unquote. In this manner, the audience spectators remain perceptive but fail to question caste system. It is not only essential to view movies from such realist viewpoint, but also to speculate the caste's gaze as apparent in a society. For the sake of detailed analysis, I have chosen four movies concerning caste which have made an impact on audience. These are Shyam Benegal's Ankur, The Seedling, came out in 1974. Then we have Benegal's Manthan, The Churning, in 1976. Then Govind Nihalani's Akrosh, Anger, in 1980. And then we have Prakash Jha's Damal, Bonded Until Death, 1985. We'll see that how it also fits in this category. In this regard, Shyam Benegal's Ankur, The Seedling, 1974, presents a complexity of caste and class issues. A detailed outline becomes a necessity here. The story is depicting two worldviews, one is traditional, another is modern. The traditional one is handled by a Jamindar, who is a landlord and strong headed patriarch, and the modern one led by Jamindar's son, Surya, played by Anantnag. He appears to be a carefree brat who lives in the illusion that he has acquired modern ideals and has sensibility to handle those. His marriage is fixed with an underage girl, and he, being Patrick Pass, would like to pursue his education further. However, his father, critical of Surya's modern ways, discontinues his education and sets him off for rural area to look after farmlands. The problem is that Surya can't stand Jamindar's mistress and her son, who have been bestowed with a portion of land for livelihood. When Surya reaches the village, he witnesses the lush green lands and farms, but a closer look projects a demeaning picture. His house is in a dilapidated state, and farms remain unattended. He confronts his father's mistress and her son Pratap, who are using Surya's pump for water. Surya meets Lakshmi, played by Shabana Azmi, a lower caste woman, who stays in a thatched hut across the fields and does cleaning job on the premises of Surya's village house. On being asked if Surya would like to have food from priest's home, he denies and declares that he doesn't believe in caste system. Thereafter, Lakshmi manages the household chores. Lakshmi's husband, Kishtya, is meek and deaf and given to drinking habits. The couple is childless. One day, Kishtya is caught stealing palm wine, and as was pre-decided, he is paraded on a mule in the street of villages. Kishtya leaves the village in shame, leaving behind Lakshmi. This provides Surya and Lakshmi with some space, and a relation is established between them, with, of course, some serious consequences. Lakshmi gets pregnant. This startles Surya as he is now worried about his status and marriage. But Lakshmi remains adamant, though she doesn't force herself on him. Unexpectedly, her husband Kishtia returns back and it fills Lakshmi with guilt. Kishtia is happy when he learns that Lakshmi is expecting. Kishtia, in excitement, decides to plead for a job from his master Surya. His excitement is misjudged by Surya as he watches Kishtia approaching him, and in a fit of rage, he starts beating him. This attracts some of villagers as well. On watching her own husband beaten by Surya, pregnant Lakshmi is shown running across the fields and reaching her husband. She hurls away the shackles of feudal system and registers her presence hurling abuses at Surya. Surya, ashamed, runs into the house. A kid watching the entire episode is so moved by the tragedy befallen on the Potter couple that he throws a stone at Surya's window and runs away. The movie depicts the rural landscape and, along with Nishant and Manthan, completes Benegal's rural trilogy. The rural landscape provides them with ample opportunities to depict situations with natural surroundings. In this manner, it comes out of a studio setup. The movie also avoids exaggerations for the sake of realistic setup. For instance, in Jamindar's house, Surya's mother is shown working in the kitchen with rough patches and sticky soot. Similarly, the inside view of lower caste Lakshmi's thatched hut convey the pain and agony of impoverished. The portrayal of Lakshmi's character is subtle. The issue of untouchability has not been touched upon a lot. Rather, the struggle of Lakshmi has been shown as that of a laborer. I mean, the issue of untouchability is ephemeral. It comes and goes according to the demand of narrative. Through this, the director is able to focus on master slave equation where Lakshmi is objectified and exploited by Surya. The untouchable aspect is shifted to the background, which remains more in the mind of audience during the movie than to be felt within the movie through action. Thereafter, Lakshmi's individuality appears more of a woman devoid of her position as a lower caste. For instance, when Surya learns of Lakshmi's pregnancy, he wants her to abort the fetus, but Lakshmi outrightly denies. The dynamics of caste appear to be inverted there. Surya loses his authority over her, but apparently the historical subjugation could be felt through Lakshmi's subtle expression as she doesn't exploit the situation for her benefits. This particular scene reveals the depleting feudal father and degenerating, delinked modern son. The father, having his feudal ways, maintained a mistress, while also providing her with the means of sustenance in terms of providing her with land. The modern son had no such intention. His modern knowledge and tall claims of being liberal and egalitarian fell flat when the same were used as ploy to trap Lakshmi. In fact, the act of not treating her the feudal way organizes the subaltern and provides them with an opportunity to speak through the cleavages of loophole. This is where the overseer Patel Sheikh approaches Surya and speaks on Lakshmi's behalf for justice. These are signs of changing times, with subaltern raising their concerns and the questioning the ways of the authority. Lakshmi wins it when she prioritizes dignity over sustenance and runs to protect her husband, hurling abuses at Surya. The final act of defiance comes from the kid, a sign that coming generation will not bear the atrocities of now waning feudal system. The movie was well acclaimed worldwide, finding space in the Berlin Film Festival, the London Film Festival, and Stratford Film Festival in 1974. It also won three national awards and many other prizes in India and abroad, and had gathered the collection of rupees 1 crore approximately. It is indeed expected from the audience spectators of parallel cinema, Indian new wave cinema, to remain active and not to be passive recipients of popular cinema with mass appeal. The stance is political. It is because it is only through this stance the effects of the movie could be felt outside among people. Then we have during 1970s there were also movies which promoted the idea of propagating equality through government's interventionist schemes like that of setting up of cooperative society. In this regard, Manthan Choning in 1976 by Shyam Benegal would be worthwhile to look at. While Ankur focuses on the apathy of caste and feudal system, Manthan dwells deep into society, digging harsh reality of caste system. Despite years after independence, the caste still plays a crucial role and determines the lifestyles of villagers. Manthan opens up the window for the audience to look factor that how in the success or failure of any state sponsored project, caste could be a dominant factor. The movie directed by Shyam Benegal, that is to say Manthan. Now, this movie is based on pioneering milk movement, which was initiated by Dr. Verghese Kurian. The film is based on world's biggest dairy program, Operation Flood, launched in year 1970. Dr. Kurian was the pioneer of the White Revolution in India. This initiative not only aimed at producing milk in substantive quantity, but also aimed at stopping the malpractices of local traders. The idea was to be materialized through setting up of cooperative societies in rural areas, thereby creating awareness among rural people. As the advertising poster of Manthan proudly claims, it was India's first crowd-funded film. Dr. Rao Girish Karnad, played by Girish Karnad, a veterinary surgeon, arrives in the village of Gujarat along with his team in order to set up the cooperative society. Dr. Rao moves around the village and collects milk samples to check the fat content present in it. Bindu, which is played by Smita Patil, refuses Dr. Rao for a free sample. But Dr. Rao takes it on his own, leaving some money behind. Bindu accuses Dr. Rao of theft, and Bhola, played by Nazaruddin Shah, uh, who's a local Harijan leader, accuses Dr. Rao as corrupt and immoral citymen who exploit the villagers for their own personal schemes. This entire scene gives the viewer an idea of the hostility, anger, deep resentment against the city people and their stubbornness to adapt to a newer system. But the real cause is that Bhola is an illegitimate son of some urban engineer. Dr. Rao, from this situation, is escaped by Mishraji, played by Amrish Puri. Dr. Rao and Mishraji gives an idea to the viewers of the corruption prevalent in the village. Mishra has been exploiting villagers by paying them low rates for milk. Slowly and steadily, Dr. Rao wins the trust of the villagers. He saves a little boy dying of fever and offers price based on fat content in the milk to the villagers. The aim of the cooperative society was to bring people together irrespective of their caste, creed, religion, and social differences. But the caste politics stalled the developments. This further worsens when Dr. Rao is accused of molestation, and despite that, he continues to work for villagers till he receives his relieving orders. Manthan is a story of providing strength to the subaltern. It strikingly brings out all pervading hegemony of upper caste. In such a scenario, Dr. Rao finds it difficult when confronted with the dynamics of caste to make the villagers self-sufficient. There is yet another problem. Behind the stance of maintaining neutrality, Dr. Rao only further deteriorate the condition of the villagers. However, the movie ends with a ray of hope with a handful of villagers trying their best to revive the cooperative society. Lack of education among villagers resulted in the subjugation of Dalit women. Moti, play emerges as a hope, perhaps Bhola too, hope who would stage the voices of Dalits appropriately. However, the entire Harijan community is shown as uneducated. Does it point out the failure of education policy as well? As the movie slowly starts to get from general to specific on the issue of setting up up a cooperative, the direct relation of caste and cooperative could be easily seen. The hegemony of Brahmanism is apparent. The failure of Dr. Rao could be seen in a way that his metropolitan experiences couldn't penetrate the autonomous domain of the villagers, which, as Guha puts it, is primordial and pre colonial. However, Dr. Rao's failure is heroic. So the movie apparently at the end is all about the tragic journey of Rao. Bhola appears like Mulkraj Anand's Bhakha, who, after hearing Gandhi's brief speech, is filled with hope and fragrance of humanity, but it is Dr. Rao who appears and maintains his saintly figure. Then we come to the next movie, which is Govind Nihalani's Akrosh. After movies during 1980s to discuss the theme of caste-based discrimination, Akrosh, again, which came out in 1980, would be the best one. The movie explicates how law could very easily be manipulated by the elites and hardly accessible for the poor and by the poor. The law becomes a tool, a medium to satisfy the ego of the affluent in the society, rendering the poor speechless and voiceless. The story of Akrosh reminds me of Franz Kafka's story, perhaps a parable, Before the Law, wherein a countryman, in the hope of getting justice, waits at the door of law, but the gatekeeper wouldn't allow him to enter and ask him to wait. His wait is endless. He tries everything from pleading to bribing, but nothing works, and ultimately he is about to die. The gatekeeper arrives and says to the man that the gate was meant for him, and since he is dying now, therefore he would shut the gates now. In literature, of course, this allegory is open to interpretation, and maybe I have taken it differently, but I think it will serve our purpose here. The plot of the movie is similar. The illusion that law is independent and accessible by all is worthwhile to see. In the movie, doorkeepers are basically the affluent people like Dusani, uh, the public prosecutor, and it was played by Amrish Puri. Then we have Dr. Vasant Patil, Bhosle, chairman. Then we have Jilla Parishad, who misuse the law, making it inaccessible for the impoverished. The movie is about a man named Lahanya Bhikhu, an Adivasi who is accused of killing his own wife. That the role of the Bhikkhu is played by Om Puri. The opening scene depicts Bhikkhu standing at the pyre of a dead body for last rites. He is accused of killing his wife because he was a drunkard and had borrowed money from many people, and since he was unable to repay the amount, he would send his wife instead to settle the score. But when his wife denied, and this is the government version, this is the version that is placed in court, which becomes the basis of bhikkhu to be to be considered as a criminal. But when his wife denies to go to others, in a fit of rage, he killed her. Nasruddin Shah plays the role of a young lawyer named Bhaskar Kulkarni, who had acquired skill under Dasani. Bhiku's case is Bhaskar's career's first case assigned to him by the government. Bhaskar is hopeless as Bhiku, his client, maintains silence throughout despite Bhaskar's attempt. He, however, is disturbed by the silence and is able to sense things behind Bhiku's silence. While he tries to initiate investigation, he realizes that some big influential forces are behind the crime which have forced Bhiku to maintain silence. With the help of social worker, he gets to know more about the tribal community as well as the reality of Bhiku's wife murder. That is to say, she was gang raped by the influential people because Bhiku had dared to rebel against contractor. In the flashback, Bhiku recalls the incident where his wife was gang raped and he was helpless. Eventually, Bhiku's father also dies. Now, in Bhiku's family, besides him, there are two members left. One is Bhiku's sister, and other one is his toddler son. Bhaskar requests the court to allow Bhiku to complete the last rites. This is the same pyre shown in the beginning of the movie. While Bhiku is performing the rituals, he snatches an axe from the constable nearby and hits it on his sister's head, killing her on spot. This is where Bhiku's loud shrills are heard. In the eyes of law, Bhiku's crime is confirmed, but Bhaskar realizes that if Bhiku hadn't killed his sister, she too would have met the same fate as his wife. So Bhiku's silence is crucial in the movie. The non-verbal aspect is so strong that it projects the helplessness of the Dalits in the absence of law. The character of Bhaskar is in stark contrast to that of his guru Dusane. While Bhaskar is an idealist, Dusane is practical. He keeps on sending hints to Bhaskar in the movie that Bhaskar too is another doorkeeper, Kafka's doorkeeper, just that he doesn't realize it yet. The youth's idealism soon is going to fade away. Dusane and Bhiku have similarities in this way. They both belong to Adivasi communities, but they both are weak. While Bhiku's silence is visible and emits signs of vengeance, pain, and angst, Dusani's silence symbolizes compliance. The vertical mobility that he had experienced comes with a price. That is to say, Dusani's vertical mobility. This is where the problem lies. The characterization of Bhaskar shifts from that of an idealist only to be elevated to the level of humanist. Dusani's pragmatism is degenerating, and anti human. This tends to typify and criminalize Dusane through his mentality. Dusane's patriarchal stance is a sort of pretense, a facade, a survival strategy in the world governed by upper caste. Also, Bhiku's wife becomes a vehicle of upper caste expression of domination. Tarnishing her image is directly linked with destroying Bhiku. This exposes the power politics between upper caste and Dalit patriarch. No doubt, then, that Dalit women are triply suppressed by Dalit patriarchs, by upper caste patriarchs, and finally by upper caste women who fail to acknowledge by homogenizing their experience. Then Bhiku's character has its own typical problems. Bhiku enters a self destructive mode at the end. While the images are powerful as well as tragic, the but does not fairly represent the problems of Adivasis. The story is shown through Bhaskar's viewpoint. This upper caste point of view keeps the movie in comfortable zone and qualifies it for the audience to sympathize with the character of Bhiku. As if Bhiku's character in the background, maintaining silence, is waiting to be vitalized when noticed by an upper caste lawyer, a middle class educated and implied audience. Then I would also like to briefly mention, Damul, which came out in 1985 and was directed by Prakash Jha. Damul is a story of bonded laborer. While India was getting ready for liberalization of economy and had set up a roadmap for the backwards with the tabling of Mandal Commission, the story of Damul depicts the feudal mindset in India. It mirrors the society wherein the caste plays an important factor, like a common denominator, which determines the course of politics and subservience of the lower caste. However, Prakaja's other movies like Gangajal and Apaharan portray a different Bihar than that of the one depicted in Damul. In Gangajal, the presence of backwards and Dalits is exhilarating. We see a complex web of caste and backward mobility in Gangajal is very well depicted there. So while in Damul, the upper caste dominate the screen and scenario, lower castes being dehumanized are hurled to the background. Such kind of things change, in 21st century Gangajal, and the upper caste seem a bit compromised. At least their position seems a bit compromised. But what happens in Damul? The upper caste, through various ploys, trap the lower caste and class people, forcing them into bonded labor. These bonded laborers, bereft of any mobility, die in frustration and apathy. In the movie, Anu Kapoor plays the role of Sanjeevan, who is also an untouchable, belonging to a Chamar caste, who has been accused of murder which has not been committed. Once trapped in the clutches of Brahmin landlord Madhu Pandit, he is given the task to steal others' cattle only to be sold again at appropriate price. While two dominant castes, Brahmins and Rajputs, are against each other in the field of politics, the lower castes are used merely as bait. Poor and tattered clothes, thatched huts, and ghetto like colonies are how lower castes were identified. There are two remarkable moments that are shown in the movie. First is that poor and unrepresented become the center of politics. And second is migration. The Green Revolution in Punjab required cheap laborers in large number, and Bihar provided with that. This created pressures on the local landlords and overlords who could not find different and sufficient labors either for their farm or, as is shown in the movie, for completing contracts. Migration away from home, from subaltern's perspective, appeared to be a solution of all their problems, including free from the bondage of upper caste landlords. In fact, Sanjeevan's act of defiance in front of the minister, who is on a visit to lower caste ghetto after the planned violence resulting in deaths, is a sign of a fallen political or state machinery. Much is controlled by these feudal lords. The act of defiance subsequently converts Sanjeevan into a criminal in the eyes of law. It turns out, Sanjeevan's wife who decides to kill Madhu Pandit when she loses everything. The movies in 1970s and 80s, which were more or less associated with parallel cinema or Indian new wave cinema or realism, made a huge impact on the targeted audience. As they lacked the commercial appeal, they had to rely on states' funding. But even while this cinema allowed to view things closely, it could not work on those models through which new ways of representing the list could be sought or could have sought. This was despite Ambedkarite ideas were making way in literature. Dalit Panthers like Namdev Dasal, Dangle, J.V. Pawar, then Raja Dhale were ferociously writing on Dalits. This version of Dalits could not make its way in cinema. However, with the lack of funds and growing popularity of in mainstream cinema, it became difficult for parallel cinema to survive. This brings us to the end of the video. Thank you very much.